Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. We have a fun show this evening. We're going to be talking USOs with Preston Dennett. Repeat guest, always fun to have on the show. So I want to thank everyone who supports us and people who cannot support the show. You can always listen to the full 2 hours free every Wednesday night live at podcastufo.com, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, also on our YouTube channel at the same time. You can also listen on the Dark Matter Digital Network every Thursday at 10 to midnight, and that's also Eastern Standard Time. Speaking of that, I think we are the longest running, possibly the longest running show, at least that's still on there, on the Dark Matter Digital Network. And that show was initiated by Keith Rowland to give Art Bell and his Midnight in the Desert show a place to land and to a home base after his contract finally expired with Sirius XM. So Art retired, as you know, after a stint on the network. Heather Wade came in, filled in for him, did a nice job, but recently with the loss of Art Bell, unfortunately on April 13th, Heather decided not to come back. So Keith made a decision to let the show go on, and it's my pleasure to announce that he has a great replacement host, Dave Schrader of Darkness Radio. I'm pretty excited about that. Really like Dave a lot. He's one of the really good people out there that dive into this topic. He also does True Crime Tuesdays. He's going to keep that going, which I'm actually really glad that I kept my Midnight in the Desert subscription. I am excited to listen to Dave as a podcast, and anyone can listen to the full shows on Midnight in the Desert. That's a weeknight, especially if you're a night owl, I should say. That starts at midnight Eastern Standard Time, and you can subscribe like I do to a podcast. So there are great shows ahead. And anyway, I tried to get him to pop on and say hi. He's a very busy guy. Little tiny bit of housekeeping here. Last week I mentioned to the listener out there that I had some hacking problems, and I made my website super secure. I made it too secure, actually. The settings on the firewall didn't boot us off. It booted us off iTunes. So that's really not going to affect anyone that's subscribed and listening. Through your media player. But if you listen on iTunes itself, I'm talking about the free show, that is, this does not affect any subscribers. So if you listen to the free show on iTunes or download the MP3, it will not be there for a couple of days. Now, we did get our feed, our RSS feed. It's called reapproved, and it's submitted. But I just got a notice yesterday from iTunes. They say it takes up to 5 days for that to come back. So should be back in a couple of days. Well, that's it for the housekeeping. Alejandro, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
Hey, you know what I just thought of? The people that can't get the show on iTunes, they can't hear me say what I just said. So all the people it's going to affect, they can't even hear that I said that. Oh, well. Anyway.
Oh, well, what can you do?
Yeah. That's the way it goes. So you're not on video this week. Your place is getting worked on or something.
Yeah, the kitchen is getting worked on the space station here, and we're so far on the other side of the galaxy that the signal could not completely reach. So it sounds a little different, and there was so much racket I had to go to a different room. And the space station, this room does not have cameras.
That's true, and it must be really hard. Must be hard to get good help out there, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just that one airlock kind of area that you will typically see is the only one with the computer with a camera.
And the kitchen in the background, you can't see the kitchen.
Yeah, the kitchen's on the other side of that. Beautiful kitchen now, especially because it's getting worked out. So you might even hear once in a while the nail gun going off, actually.
All right, so what's going on in the UFO world?
Oh, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the UFO world. I guess one thing to talk about that I think is important And it's interesting where this article showed up, but it's on a online kind of news magazine called Now. And I think this is really cool. Being someone who's into PR and stuff, they kind of have their own. Northrop Grumman has its own kind of news magazine site called Now, and where they write some news. And I just think that's kind of cool because, sometimes it's harder for corporations to get news out. Like I recently did a thing with 3M, and they have some interesting science. So doing their own kind of thing is kind of neat, I think. And this is an example of a great story that has come out because of that. And this is regarding fast radio bursts. So you and I have talked about this before. These are these radio signals that they've been able to hear. Some of the first people to get them are SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and different cosmic bodies essentially out there, suns, novas, all of these things kind of create radio waves that travel throughout space, and we listen in on those. Now, if you're an astronomer, you're listening in on those to kind of get an idea of the nature of this thing you're listening to. But if you're SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, you're listening for signals that have some sort of signature that they may come from an intelligent civilization, especially if it's the same signal repeating. If it's powerful and it's the same signal repeating exactly the same over and over again. They received some signals. They weren't repeating over and over exactly, but they were very strong coming from, and they weren't of a nature that they could understand what they were. They didn't sound like anything we've listened to before. So this was sort of a mystery. Now, part of this mystery was discovered. Some of these were discovered to be, because they were happening at the same time every day. But it turned out one of the astronomers was turning on the microwave and heating up their lunch. And that's what caused some of these. But we only had a few that were truly anomalous. And then this Russian billionaire who decided to help out with the search for extraterrestrials, essentially, he funded more telescopes to listen for more of these things, and they retrieved a bunch more. And so the mystery was even bigger. It's like, wow, we're getting even more of these signals. Well, now, in this article that just came out on May 3rd, so just a few days ago, they have narrowed down where these radio waves are coming from, and they figure that this might be from a certain type of sun, essentially. So what they're essentially have decided is that they think that it's coming from like a supernova, possibly a super luminous supernovae and long gamma ray bursts. So they're getting closer to discovering what it was. The bummer is, of course, it's not alien, because people were thinking, and even scientists were theorizing, that maybe these are alien signals. But they're getting closer to possibly not an alien signal. They don't know exactly, but they're getting closer to an answer.
So how can they get closer to an answer? Just is that by just repeating what they're doing, or
yeah, essentially is what they do is they narrow down where it's coming from. So when you don't get many of these signals, it's hard to know exactly where it's from. And if you get them from one telescope, if you use multiple telescopes to listen in to this one area, and essentially that's what Milner has to do, is pay these people for telescope time so they can focus it at this certain area and then receive some more of those signals, and then they can study them, the more signals that they get. And that's how they're able to get closer to an answer.
Yeah, I know. It seems like whenever and you and I have talked about this too, whenever they think they discover something new and outrageous, there always seems to be, a natural, unusual, unheard of way that this happens, going all the way back since the beginning of astronomy. They keep discovering things.
Well, it is funny, and it is interesting, because you're exactly right. Like, with astronomy, with a lot of types of science, we predict, we run models, we have math, and we think often, we as humans or scientists think that they understand much about nature. So when they get something that they can't explain, or it's way out of the scope of what they expect to be out there, it kind of really blows their mind. And that's why, at least in today's world, that's what's kind of more exciting, is they speculate more and more often in scientific circle that, hey, maybe this is aliens. I don't know if this is Giorgio Tsoukalos' fault, that people are thinking of aliens more, but they're like, wow, maybe this is aliens. So it's interesting that they're willing to go there when it comes to speculation. But you're right. It often turns out to be a natural occurrence because science, and especially in astronomy, proves over and over again that reality, the nature, or what's going on out there is much, much stranger than we could ever imagine. And so, that's how discoveries are made. But it is cool that they're going to the alien thing. And of course, it would be exciting. And I think, many of people who listen to our shows are expecting that, it's possible any moment now they could come out and say, hey, turns out these are aliens. Now, these things are so far away that the signals that we're getting are very, very old, something like millions of years old.
I know, I think wasn't it 3 billion?
Something like that. Yeah, you're probably right, because I remember we discussed this before. Mm-hmm. But that would still be exciting. Think of that. We find evidence that there was a culture out there 3 billion years ago.
Very possible,
that
too.
Would be fascinating.
Yeah. I remember talking to Seth Shostak about the WOW signal, and he said it was no big deal, and it just got all of the attention because of the astronomer writing WOW next to it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, but there's been some talk about that. Are people still...
Yeah, there was a...
Go ahead.
Oh, no, what was interesting is, I think what you're talking about is not too long ago, Antonio Paris, who's actually someone who did some MUFON investigating and started his own paranormal group. He's an astronomer. Actually, he's trying to become an astronaut right now, and he's gaining some ground. Really cool. People should follow him, because one of the cool things, he's from Puerto Rico, and he's been raising money and going back there and helping people, because they're still out of power in many places, and people are still struggling. So it's really cool that he's been doing that, and wish him all the luck. He's a great guest too. If you've never had him on your show, I have before, but he did, and on this topic, he speculated that the WOW signal was some sort of comet, or he figured out what that WOW signal is, because they still don't know exactly what it was. And interestingly enough, Seth Shostak defended the mystery of it. He said Antonio Paris was wrong in this paper that he wrote, and he submitted it to a peer review article. And he says no, that the WOW signal is still an unknown origin. So he may have downplayed it to you, but he defended it recently, saying no, it's still weird. It's more important. It depends on probably the person he's talking to. He wants to dissuade people like you from going down the extraterrestrial route necessarily, but at the same time, he wants to keep that wonder alive, because that's what they do. They're looking for ET signals. So he kind of plays both sides of the fence there, but that's probably the news you were thinking of. That's fairly recent.
Well, I think the next time I talk to Seth, I'm going to use reverse psychology.
That's a great idea.
Yep. So no such thing as aliens or UFOs, Seth. What are you talking?
Yeah.
Why are you working there?
Yeah, you should even approach him and be like, well, they figured out what that was, didn't they, Seth? And he'd be like, wait a minute. And then you can turn it on him and be like, so it is aliens.
Yeah.
And,
put him
see
right
what
in
he
a
says
corner.
to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, get that son of a gun.
Anything else going on? We've just got a few minutes left here.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of other interesting stuff going on. Of course, you could go to openminds.tv and look at the daily headlines and see some of this stuff, or I know you post links as well on your social media.
Yeah.
But some really interesting stuff over in from the I team, from George Knapp in particular, who's of course a journalist with KLAS and also occasionally hosts Coast to Coast AM. But this is news that was kind of inkling out from the UFO field. There's some researchers such as the Australian Paul Dean and some others who were able to find some paperwork to show that Robert Bigelow actually started working on kind of with his Bigelow Aerospace UFO and paranormal research before this defense contract came around that made big news in the New York Times. And so some of these groups, they were able to find some papers and even some postings for jobs for this organization, which had a different name than the one that Elizondo shares with us.
Yeah.
So this started coming out, news about this, and George Knapp ended up writing a full story about this topic and sharing much more information. So this organization was called the Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Application Program. And like it sounds, it kind of had a more broader scope about weaponry and stuff like this. And we don't have necessarily proof that it was UFOs, but George Knapp kind of confirms that, you know, this was the original organization that was created, and then Harry Reid was able to get funding from the government for this program. But Bigelow spent some of his own money on this. Eventually, this is the program that turned into the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And essentially, Elizondo, who headed that, who recently retired, he's the one that reason we know about all of this. He is the one who, once they lost funding, narrowed the scope to UFOs essentially, and renamed the organization. So just a little bit of background. It's not necessarily anything really huge or exciting. I guess we all knew that Bigelow was spending money on this sort of research before anyway. He had something called the National Institute of Discovery Sciences early on where he was looking into paranormal cases. And we already know that this project that Elizondo worked on was looking at UFOs, which is the big news, important piece, and that they found cases where they believe there was unknown technology. So it's not necessarily huge news, but it does fill in the gaps and gives us a little more history about what happened at that time.
Right. Well, that's it, isn't it, for tonight?
Yeah, that's about it. That's some of the cool news out there. And otherwise, there was another story I thought. You and I talked about it recently? The UK UFO files. There were some more UK
Go ahead.
UFO
we
files
got a couple minutes.
that came out. Okay. Yeah. And in these files, essentially, they talk about a little bit more about this Project Condign. And this Project Condign, you might have talked to Nick Pope about it, and I as well. It was a paper that came out investigating UFOs. And this was around 2000. When the investigation happened, this paper was classified. And it eventually got declassified. And it was interesting, but it was really kind of speculation about the UFO phenomena. And more than anything, the document speculated that perhaps there is a plasma phenomena that happens. And that's what people are observing, these lights. And that's what it was really kind of arguing, although it was more speculative. They didn't really get into any hard evidence. One of the things they talked about was the Rendlesham Forest, and they speculated that, this big mass sighting in 1980 by U.S. airmen on this base that was on lease in the UK, that perhaps some of those men were physically affected by this plasma phenomena. And so it was interesting. I asked Nick Pope, why did that even happen? Why did these guys spend all this time to kind of speculate and look into this? And he said it was really backed by a lot of people who are really interested in UFOs, who were in the intelligence community in Britain. So they wanted to do a study, but they just didn't have access, nor could they share classified information. So the only thing they could really share was unclassified information. So they couldn't really get into much. Well, these new files that came out, and David Clark, a historian in the UK who is interested in UFOs, kind of got some more files, UFO files, and what these show is that there was also this kind of background at that time to do one last study to kind of prove that there's nothing to UFOs and that we need to close the books. And also this discussion about why they classified this study and kind of this debate on classifying the study. And they classified the study eventually because they were embarrassed about looking into UFOs. They didn't want the public to know. And David Clark kind of argues that, that is why people believe in conspiracies, that, they feel there's not much to it, but then they classify this stuff, and then it makes it look like there's this bigger cover-up. And so David Clark is arguing they need to be more forthcoming, and their embarrassment behind all of this has really caused them their own problem with conspiracy theories and stuff like this. Right. Now, Nick Pope is also right now going out in the media as we speak. He tweeted something today, and he's arguing that these last bit of UFO files that the UK is releasing, they need to provide those to everyone for free. And they used to do that when they were putting out all their UFO files. But unfortunately, the last few remaining files they've released lately, you actually have to go all the way to this place near London to get copies. And so they're not providing them free to the public for a period of time. So that's kind of the latest developments on that.
Yeah, when you and I were talking about that, there's so many things that happened in the Rendlesham Forest incident that plasma just doesn't fit. The intelligence of whatever it was, the beams coming down to the ground and to the bomb bunker, whatever it was.
Exactly. That's directed. That seems intelligent. This ball of light that beams a light, and Colonel Halt even was a witness to this, over the weapons storage area where there's secretly hidden nuclear weapons, and then it comes towards them and beams this light at their feet. That really is indicative of some sort of intelligence, and a plasma phenomena doesn't seem like it would fit that scenario.
Right. All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot, and I hope your kitchen gets tidied up and back together.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah.
So we can start enjoying some more alien cuisine. Some of these planets out here on the far side of the galaxy actually have quite the remarkable culinary prowess and just some delicious. Lots of vegetarians out here
really?
as well.
Wow.
So which is good for me because I'm a vegetarian. So
yeah,
I'm enjoying myself, and I'm looking forward to our kitchen being finished up here.
All right, Alejandro. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. So our guest, we've had him on. I think this will be the third time he's on the show. His book is called Undersea UFO Base, an in-depth investigation of UFOs, USOs, and the Santa Catalina Channel, and more. He has been investigating UFOs and the paranormal since 1986, when he discovered that his family and friends and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses and a variety of paranormal phenomena. He's also a field investigator for MUFON, a ghost hunter, all kinds of stuff, and a fun guy, always nice to have on. Preston, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
And you remember to unmute your mic. That you're in the small percentage that actually remembers that. So, hey, you were on, I think, about a year ago, I believe, something like that, and you have a new book. And interesting book. I've wanted to talk to people about USOs. There's not a lot of books and people that actually discuss the subject, and they're a small percentage of UFO sightings, or USO sightings. I guess they're a small percentage of unknown sightings that people see, but they're very interesting, and hopefully we're going to be covering why that is and some interesting cases and all that. Can you tell the listening audience a little bit about yourself that have not heard you before?
Yeah, sure. I got involved in UFO research involuntarily, by the way, in 1986 after hearing a report on the news in mid-November 1986. There was a sighting over Alaska by a Japanese commercial airliner, It's now a really well-known case. Captain Taroshi was tracked by 3 very large UFOs. It was on his onboard radar. It was a great case. The news people just kind of laughed about it, tongue in cheek. They didn't cover really any details at all. But it interested me, and I remembered my brother had seen a UFO, so I brought it up to him, and I didn't believe him the first time. Nobody in my family did. Oh. But now I asked him about it, and he's like, yeah, it was a metallic object. It had colored lights on it. Me and my 2 friends chased it. Well, I called up his 2 friends, and I asked them, what did you see? And they gave the same description. And I started asking people. I found out my sister-in-law had seen a UFO. She had 2 friends with her. She later had an encounter with gray-type ETs in Van Nuys, California, near her home, right in front of Stagg Street Elementary School, actually, late at night.
Wow.
My other sister-in-law, I asked her about it, and she finally admitted that she had had childhood experiences with entities coming into her bedroom for about a period of a couple of months, and then it stopped. I had a best friend who apparently had missing time. I had another friend who had a sighting with her friend. She's a pilot, a scuba diver, a great witness. I brought it up at work, and this lady, I worked right next to her. I'd worked with her for, 5 or 10 years at this point, a long time. And she's like, yeah, me and my whole family saw this UFO, and it was darting around. It would hover. It was silent, turning at right angles. I'm like, huh. And in walks Dorothy. I love Dorothy. I've worked with her for a very long time. She's like, UFOs? Oh, yeah. One chased us home from the library, me and my best friend and my mom. I'm like, really? And she said, yeah. She says, it's really weird. We live 5 minutes from the library. We left at exactly 9 o'clock, right when the library closed. And we didn't get home till 10:15. She says, it's really weird. I don't know what happened to the time. And, this was before Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time, had been reprinted and become a bestseller. So I'm like, whoa.
So
what is going on?
Pardon me, was this before you had ever heard of anyone talk about missing time yourself?
Yes, I'd certainly heard of UFOs, but was repulsed by the subject, mainly because people were saying, I saw humanoids. And I was pretty sure that the stars were too far away, for one thing. And second of all, aliens wouldn't look at all like us. So I was full of misconceptions about the phenomena and preconceptions. But this kind of broke through that veneer, my skepticism. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to the library and I'm going to disprove these people. And I couldn't. All the books were mostly pro-UFO. And so that's how I started researching stuff. I started interviewing people. I just couldn't get over it. It was bad news as far as I was concerned. Hit me like a ton of bricks. My family, friends, and coworkers had been lying to me for a long time. It was never taught in schools. It wasn't being taken seriously. And yet it looked like it was actually happening. So I dived in. I joined all the UFO groups. I started interviewing people, going out into the fields, really, UFO hunting. And almost immediately I started getting USO reports. So it started right away.
Wow.
I didn't know at the time that this area was particularly active for USOs. But yeah, I started collecting them, all those years ago.
Now, you're in Southern California, right?
That's right, yeah. I currently live in Reseda.
Yeah.
At the time I was researching, I lived closer to the beach in Topanga Canyon.
Oh, yeah.
Which turned out to be a pretty active area, sort of a wave area or a hot spot. And I always thought, there's something unusual about Topanga Canyon and Malibu, Santa Monica, this area. And it wasn't until much later that I started shifting my research out towards the ocean when I realized that was probably the origin of all this activity.
There's for one thing, there are so many sightings in California in general. And I just looked in today on statistics on listeners to my free show, and last month there were 40,000 listeners from California. So, I mean,
Wow.
40,000 listens, I should say, on my free show. California is way ahead of the next state below that is New York, and that's 10,000. So California is huge when it comes to listeners to this show. And also the UFO sightings are so prevalent.
Yeah, it's the number one state
Yep.
in terms of UFO producing reports, according to both MUFON and National UFO Reporting Center.
Right. Yeah.
Texas is up there, Washington, but California's number one.
Yeah, by far. And, I realize there's a big population there. And the other thing that kind of plays into it is the weather is there's a lot more sunny days out there than there is in most of the country, actually. So that also does play part of it.
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors. I thought, it was maybe just Southern Californians in the New Age attitude.
Yeah.
I don't think so. There's a lot of military bases here as well. I think that's a factor. I don't know. It is definitely number one.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about USOs. What would you say in your research, what did you find is the earliest account of a USO that you could find out that way?
Well, certainly they stretch back, hundreds of years. There's some very early reports from Charles Fort. There's, I believe, a report from Christopher Columbus, actually, which I don't know a whole lot about. But as far as this particular area, and by that I mean right off the Southern California coast, sort of the Santa Catalina, San Pedro Channel area, stretching like at the north end, Santa Barbara, Channel Islands, all the way south through Malibu, Santa Monica, Rancho Palos Verdes, Long Beach, down pretty much to San Clemente. Lots of reports. And the earliest ones I could find were dated around the 1920s. There was a researcher by the name of Wishar Survey who wrote a book about California mysteries, and talked about a number of different paranormal stuff, but mentioned people who were seeing what they called sky boats, objects which would land on the water right off the coast there and then take off. He does not have a lot of detail on it, but it's certainly some intriguing early reports. Probably the earliest report that it's really detailed occurred right with the modern age of UFOs, 1947. And it's actually a really interesting report. It began up in the Northern California area, in the San Francisco Bay area, and involved what shippers, freighters, called a undersea reef, or a phantom reef, this mysterious mass underwater that kept moving around and was causing havoc for shipping. And so many boaters had reported this thing that they finally just called the Navy and said, "You've got to investigate this, something's going on." And the Navy sent up a ship called the Maury to investigate it, and they actually tracked this phantom reef down the coast of California to Southern California, at which point it went out to sea maybe 200 miles or so. They tracked it there, they caught it on their sonar, and at some point just disappeared, and they never found it again.
So this was a large mass, you're saying, actually?
Yes, absolutely, very large, and they could not figure out what it is, and apparently it wasn't ours. So they were very concerned and never found it after it disappeared. But I'm thinking, this is probably when the activity this is when the activity started in earnest in this area.
I have someone that's been on the show before that had an encounter. I just text him right now to see if he can call in, and we'll be taking calls after 9 o'clock. So hopefully he'll call in and tell his story. You'll be able to get to hear that as well. I'm not sure exactly where that was based. I think actually it was on the East Coast, but not positive. But when you were looking into this, did you also look at other regions besides just California as well?
I did, not in depth. I'm certainly aware that there's USO activity all over the world. For that matter, it's not just in oceans, it's in lakes and rivers.
Yeah.
I know that Puerto Rico has a lot of activity, but I mainly concentrated my research in this area. I did get a number of reports from other people, which were very intriguing. A very intriguing case off the East Coast, one in the Bahamas area, another in a small lake outside of Hot Springs, Arkansas, another in a lake in Florida, Lake Miccosukee. So yeah, a lot of reports, but in this area, I've documented over 70 reports of USOs, and for that matter, the same amount of UFOs, which weren't seen going into the water, but were seen above the water. So it's a lot of reports in this area, stretching back, all the way to the 1940s at least, to pretty much the present day. And it's got to be a lot more than just the 70, because, as I'm sure you know, most people don't report their UFO sightings in any official capacity. One in 10, maybe. That's true. 1 in 100, right?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay, 70, probably closer to 700, maybe 7,000 reports.
Yeah, I've been at a number of conferences where they'll ask people how many people saw a UFO and then how many people report them, and it's a very small fraction. I would guess that you're probably right. Right, 1 out of 10 people may actually report them. Of the people in those audiences, I've seen that a couple of times.
Especially if it's a really major encounter, they're less inclined. If it's a freaky details and all of this.
Every person that I can think of that I've talked to that really doesn't pay attention to the subject and just had a sighting and tells me about their sighting, I can't think of one single person that's ever said, and I reported it. They had the encounter, it blew their mind, or whatever it is that happened. But I don't ever remember anyone saying they reported it. I didn't report my sighting I had in 2006.
All right.
So,
and if you were to extrapolate, New Forks numbers and MUFON numbers, the people who actually do report to MUFON, the number of reports actually taking place daily is not just a dozen or so. It's probably closer to hundreds. And I'm guessing like right now, someone's being abducted, multiple people. Right now, there's many people on our planet having sightings at any given time.
Which really makes you wonder, like, who's visiting us? That's always the question. And why so frequently? And another thing, getting back to USOs, that is such a puzzle. What are they doing under the water? And a couple of reasons I say that. First of all, of course, there's a lot more water on the Earth than there is land mass, so there's plenty of places to hide. But what do they just rest on the bottom? And it sounds awful boring to me. Or do they, are these actually non-human, or mechanical devices, or there's just so many, like a drone or something. There's just so many questions. These even more questions, USOs on USOs than there are UFOs to me. The pressure of the depth of the water, all that stuff is. How do they deal with that? And they're obviously waterproof.
Right. Well, I think probably some of them are drones, as we would think of them, because I know that there's one guy I interviewed. I didn't get to do a formal interview with him, but I did talk to him a few times. He was scuba diving in this area and had this little ball of light come zooming up to him. And I'm like, are you serious? I know the guy really well. And he says, yeah, it came right up to me, scared the living daylights out of me, and moved very fast. It was much too small, size of a softball, he said. Maybe a little larger. It was hard to tell. It was pretty bright. And it kind of startled him, but it was not another diver, and it moved way too fast. It certainly wasn't a fish.
Now, this was during daylight, or was this night diving?
This was daylight.
Wow,
but it's still,
that's crazy.
The light is significantly cut down when you're underwater there. But yeah, most of these, I think, are your standard UFOs. You can't really call them UFOs when they're underwater, so that's how the term, USO was coined. but otherwise they're pretty much the same thing. Some of these objects are much larger than others, all the way from stadium-sized, 200 feet, 300 feet, all the way down to tiny little, 20-foot, 10-foot craft. And another really weird thing, and this has always puzzled me in UFO research in general, is the wide variety of shapes. There's the standard saucer-shaped, and certainly there's a lot of reports of that. But in this area, there is every shape I have ever heard, and some I haven't ever heard. I mean, the people could not describe them, as they were, blobs or oddly shaped with strange angles. But yes, spherical, saucer-shaped, manta-ray-shaped, cylindrical, you name it. V's, triangles, box-shaped, rectangular.
How about like organically shaped? Are there some like that? I mean, there was an octopus type UFO someone reported, and really strange looking things. Do they have those type of things coming out of the water too, or?
There's donut shaped.
Yeah.
There was manta ray shaped, but I did not get octopus. but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, there's also these weird kind of glowing clouds or anomalous cloud phenomena. These weird clouds that appear with very sharp edges and seem to have little pastel lights around the perimeter. Some people say the lights get really bright and start to look metallic, and then the clouds will like split apart and create a row of objects. So it's the whole range of sightings is taking place in this area.
Now, what is more frequent when someone is reporting one coming out of the water or one going into the water?
In by far, and I think the reason for that is because they're more visible. I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but you see this object in the sky, and then it's coming down, and it goes in the water. Whereas if one comes out, if you don't catch it as it's coming out, you would never know, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing that's the reason. I'm not sure that they actually are more common. A number of people never see these objects come in or out. They just see it under the water, particularly boaters and a few people along the beach. But the rarest of all is to see one go in and out of the water. But I got a couple of those too. Wow.
If I was out in my boat and I saw a UFO under the water, I would totally freak out. I would much rather see one in the sky. Something like that kind of gives me the creeps. I can't imagine. So,
this one senior electronics engineer, great witness, was out there, and this is the mid-1980s at the northern end, in his fully equipped boat, foggy night, going along, when he sees this green glow ahead of him. And he's like, well, that's odd. That's not standard lights. And it's getting brighter and brighter. And so he stops, doesn't want to have a collision. And this thing just gets closer and closer to him. And suddenly he realizes this thing was underwater. And it came right up to his boat. Said it must have been at least 300 feet across, much larger than his boat. He looks down at his compasses. They're slowly spinning, both of them. One started to spin faster. It actually broke off its moorings. He tried to call the Coast Guard. His radio was dead. He said at this point he was just too petrified to move. That's a direct quote. And just completely freaked him out and eventually moved on. But what I found really interesting about that report, it was pretty, low, or very close to his boat. I guess maybe 50, 100 feet down, not very deep. But it targeted him. It actually came, and targeted his boat. And there's case after case like that where these things are, could have gone around, but no, they don't. They come right under the boat.
Wow. Now, Catalina Island in particular. Now, I know you did the Santa Catalina Ridge, a channel. But Catalina Island, there's been so many UFO sightings there that they actually have like a program for UFO tours, which is
right.
Amazing.
Yeah, I went there with my office, my coworkers, the boss did a little vacation to Catalina, and we're on the bus. We're taking the bus tour, and he starts talking about UFOs. Everyone at my work turns and looks right at me because I'm pretty well known at my office for this stuff. But I'm like, hey, but yeah, I mean the reason for that is it's prime viewing area. It's literally overlooks the exact center of this activity. And I mean, this was really the first data point. I have like 5 really strong data points where I started to think there's a USO base, an undersea base. And the first one was just the huge number of reports in a sharply defined area. So if you go to Northern California, yeah, there's a few, but nothing like here. Certainly Oregon, Washington, no. Up and down the East Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, like we mentioned earlier, there are areas around the world which do have a lot. But I'm thinking this has got to be one of the top 5 areas, and I mean, mile for mile, it might be the most active area on our planet.
Wow.
So, I mean, what does that say? I mean, this is what really had me scratching my head. I'm like, something's going on here. Something has got to be going on here, because how do you explain the huge number of reports in a sharply defined area that seem to be centered right over the water?
So this is where you came up with the thought there might be an underground UFO or USO base?
Right. It kind of came slowly. I know Robert Stanley. He's an early researcher and still active. He was one of the first to point to this area and say, hey, stuff is going on. He had a number of sightings himself of objects going in and out of the water. And as far as I know, he's the first to actually speculate that there is or could be some sort of base down here. And he wrote about this possibility. I know Anne Druffel, another pioneering early researcher.
Yeah.
She pointed to this area way back in the 1970s and says we should, put this under constant surveillance because something is going on in this area. Bill Hamilton, he uncovered reports. A lot of early researchers uncovered reports long before I came along. And I started getting reports right away. I mean, one lady I interviewed, she's driving along the coast with a friend. Her friend is driving. She's at Malibu, and she looks to the ocean. She sees this light floating on the water, and she thinks, well, that's odd. It's very bright. It looks just like a sphere of light, not like a boat, really bright. And she turns to her friend, says, look at that. What do you think that is? And she points to it. As soon as he looks at it, this thing takes off straight up, disappears.
Wow.
So I talked to another guy, has a house on the coast. He saw an unidentified floating object right there floating on the water, called the Coast Guard. They're like, no, it's not a boat. He's like, are you sure? It looks like a boat on fire. He says it was giving off prismatic glows and just really bright. And they're like, no, we don't know what it is. So, I started getting a lot of reports. I was talking to some people who are having abductions, and they started telling me, I think there might be a base in this area, just their intuitive feeling. I was thinking the same thing because just of the huge number of reports. There was another lady I talked to. She was told flat out by Gray type ETs, she's up in the Santa Barbara area, they told her that they do have bases in the ocean and have been here for a very, very long time, among other things they told her. But yeah, I started beginning to wonder if maybe there's a base. I've got a number of data points pointing towards it, but the strongest by far is the huge number of reports.
Wow. I know a long time friend of mine, years before she was a friend of mine before I got into UFOs, actually. And it's through my real life, which is antiques and fine art. Eventually, we have like a comfortable relationship where I can talk to her, and eventually I told her that I'd do a show on UFOs, and I had a sighting, and et cetera. And she lives in, I'm trying to remember, it's something like Gold Beach, Oregon, something like that. I think that's what it's called. And she said that there's several scientists that have just shown up there, and they had a talk one night, and they think that there's something off the coast up there, is what they were coming up with in some type of communication. This is things that she was talking about. These aren't my words. And that whatever it is dormant and going to be dormant until all of a sudden, they'll all wake up at the same time in these little bases up there, and something's going to happen according to her, and that's why the scientists moved there. And I thought it was kind of wacky, but for her to come up with all this, I had no idea she had that aspect, that side of her. She's a very balanced type of person. Worked at the Vatican as an artist, and all kinds of things. So anyway, interesting. And I do understand why a lot of people think that, like I said earlier, there's so much water on this planet. Like, for instance, if space junk falls, 90% of the time it seems to fall in the water. It doesn't even, fall on land. Land is just such a small part of what we are here.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that they're taking advantage of it is that we can't go underwater in the way that they can. So these objects are coming down and they hit the water and don't make a splash, don't make a sound. They have obviously some sort of force field or some way of pushing the water aside, and could come up out of the water and don't drag the water in most cases with them. There are a few where they have, actually, but in most cases, no. And I don't know how many USOs there are, but I'm guessing there's a lot of them that we don't know about. Wouldn't surprise me if there's multiple bases, but definitely this area, I think they're hiding down there because they can, and because we can't get to them, certainly not easily. And it's really interesting because, this area where they're at is not a great place for UFOs, really, in terms of being caught, being seen, because on the north end we have Point Mugu Naval Base. There's San Clemente Island just beyond Catalina, which is purely military. There's Seal Beach, naval weapons stations at the south end. It's a pretty heavily militarized area. So it's pretty surprising that there's so much activity here.
Has anyone ever speculated that this could be secret military craft or,
Certainly. I'm guessing some of it might be, but I'm pretty darn sure that most of it is not. And I'll tell you why. I've got 5 really good reasons why I don't think it's military. Certainly, I've talked to some of these military guys. I talked to a submarine navigator. I talked to an electrician's mate on a submarine. I talked to a Navy officer who saw a USO in this area. So they're certainly baffled by it themselves. But the reason why I don't think it's military is because, for one, people are being taken on board these craft, and they're not seeing humans. They're seeing grays. They're seeing praying mantis. There's some cases where people are seeing humanoids, but they're not human. Does not appear to be that who's ever inside these is military. That's the first reason. But secondly, these sightings are taking place over a very heavy population center, and it flies in the face of military protocol to test fly advanced secret craft over someone's house, over everybody's house, or to chase cars down the road, or to hover right over a home and light it up so that everyone inside wakes up and comes outside. They're putting on what amounts to displays in some cases, clearly wanting to be seen. No, military does not do that. I'm going to say about 10% of the cases, maybe a little more, 20, these objects are being chased by military aircraft. We're not going to be chasing our own aircraft. So that doesn't make sense. Another reason is there are just too many of these sightings. There's too many of these craft. I don't think our military has that many airplanes or advanced aircraft, certainly. It's been going on way too long. These objects were darting around, hovering silently way back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, well before our military was, as advanced as it is today.
Right.
So, I mean, there's all these reasons why it certainly does not look like it's military. And yeah, the military witnesses that I've spoken to, a Coast Guard captain I've spoken to, lots of people are completely baffled. And they said, no, 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 this is not military. It's not.
Has anyone ever mentioned any type of sound coming from these objects?
No, not really. I mean, there's a few cases where people have said they've heard a low buzz. In terms of USOs, no. No one's heard any sound from them really at all. But a few cases involving a low hum, a low buzzing noise. But those are actually very rare in terms of USOs and UFOs right over the water here.
Yeah.
So now, yeah, they're
north of you. South of you, actually off San Diego, the Nimitz back in 2004, the Nimitz case. There's conflicting reports, and I don't know which one is actually accurate. That some say that the object was right above the surface of the water, and then a few times I've heard someone say that the object was just below the water. Did you look into that at all, the Nimitz case?
No, I don't know a lot about that particular case. I do know there's a lot of military witnesses. I mean, one that really impressed me, I talked to Dr. Gary Wagner, who was on board the USS Long Beach. This was back in, 1983. Now, the USS Long Beach is a nuclear-powered aircraft, or ship. So this, I think, is what really attracts the UFOs and the USOs, because this has turned up in other cases. And he was off on the far side of Catalina Island when they saw a very unusual object right there on the water. They couldn't tell if it was, right above the water or on the horizon or partly in the water, but it was this large kind of half disc with a little kind of pile-like section cut out of it. It was pulsating, and he calls the bridge and tries to get information, and they won't tell him anything. They're like, we're just too damn busy here. But everyone on the ship saw it. It was a relatively brief sighting, but they could not identify it. I talked to a Coast Guard captain. He had a really amazing sighting, not in this area, but off, like near the Haiti area, the Dominican Republic, this area, was with two other people in a boat, small boat, which was actually a Navy boat equipped with sonar. It was not active, the equipment. But he was coming into a safe harbor after a very big storm when they were targeted by these USOs, which came right under their boat and were large, 20 feet across perhaps, donut-shaped, meaning they had a hollow center, but very large, kind of a blue ring of light, and would blink on and off. He says there must have been 10, maybe 20 of them or more. It was very hard to tell if they were moving or not because they were moving, and it freaked them all out. None of them could identify it. He contacted me because he says, honestly, I can't find any information about USOs really at all, on the internet or anywhere. There's not a lot of information out there. And they were kind of followed by these USOs for a short period until they went into the harbor there. And right after they parked and all the USOs were gone, one final object came up and went right towards their boat as if investigating them.
Gee.
So, I mean,
Wow.
Yeah, these military guys are seeing this stuff, and I'm guessing it's a lot more common than we're hearing because it's military policy to not talk about this.
Yeah, that's the person that's going to call in here in a little bit is going to talk about that particular aspect of it. Now, Shag Harbor, for instance, that was they tracked, or there is, I don't know how accurate it is, but it was, I believe, the first time the Navy actually admitted that it was a UFO, and there was some tracking of, I think, 2 objects way up the coast. So that's again on the East Coast, but that's one of the really great one of the great sightings, I think.
Oh,
interesting.
very well verified. Lots of witnesses, official documents. Lasted a long time, It's a great case. Yeah,
Yeah.
very familiar with it.
Yeah.
Very unusual. One case, oh God, I'd love to talk about, but just because I think it's one of my favorite in the book. Didn't take place in this Catalina Channel area, but rather on the East Coast in 1971 to a guy named Ray Sachs, who was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore, a submarine with nuclear missiles in it. And he was on the other subs and never had anything unusual happen. Gets on board this sub, and strange things started happening. I mean, at one point, all the engines shut off. There are, multiple backup things that should not allow this to happen, but it did, and they couldn't explain it. But the weirdest incident by far occurred in 1971 as they're heading up the coast there, and they were on the surface, moving along at around 12 knots or so. He was a lookout, along with another petty officer. He was an electrician's mate. The captain was there, and the second in command. We're all on deck when this USO comes zooming up. He said maybe 100 knots, very fast, and totally silent, comes right up next to the sub, 50 feet off, and starts pacing them, tracking them. It's got to be 50 feet across. It's huge, very bright. And the captain turns to Ray and says, what do the sonar guys say? Are they painting anything? What do they see? And they weren't seeing anything. They saw nothing at all. This was not showing up on sonar.
Did you say this was 71? 19?
Yeah, I believe it was 71.
Wow.
And so they're freaking out because this object is not going away. It's following them, and they don't know what it is. And one by one, all the main officers go up on deck to take a look at this thing because they want to see it. Of course, the petty officers are not allowed on deck. But Ray Sachs is there watching all of this as one officer after another comes up, looks at it, then goes back below. This object paced that submarine, the Clamagore, for about 15, maybe 20 minutes before it finally took off in another direction at about 50 knots and was right under the water there, 20 feet down, maybe 30. It was hard for them to tell. They couldn't see any solid object, just a light. But the aftermath was really interesting because Ray and the other lookout, they're just talking their heads.
Uh-oh. Looks like Skype froze. Hang on. Let me see if I can get him back on the line. I'm going to have to hang up, and so hang in there, everyone. I'm going to hang up on him and call him right back. And so just hold tight. I'm not sure exactly what it was that happened. All right, so it's just after 9. We're actually taking calls. So that number we're gonna have over on the screen right now. Let's see. Not sure what happened. Hopefully he'll dial back in. He's not picking up. These type of things. It's always the government that does this type of thing, I'm sure. All right, so you can see that number is up on the screen right now on YouTube. Anyone listening live right now can call in that number. You're welcome to call. While we're waiting, I'm going to see if I can get the person to call in now. Hang on just a second. Anyway, I will try him one more time. So that number's up on the screen if anyone wants to call in. And interesting topic. I find this a very interesting topic. I'm not sure, and of course I'll say this to him too, I'm not sure how much I really buy into the fact that there's possibly an underwater, that is, base off the shore. I know the I think it was Jimmy Church made something kind of famous, calling it an underwater base. It's something on Google Maps. If you check that out, you can see it. Okay, looks like he's calling back. Well, I think it is. Hello, is this Preston, or is this a caller?
This is a caller.
Hi, caller. Thanks for calling in. You have, well, our guest is not with us. Do you have a sighting you want to talk about, or thanks for calling?
Not yet. Well, I do, but I wanted to ask him a question, basically.
All right.
So,
well, he disappeared. I'm not really sure exactly what happened. But what's your first name? Where are you calling from?
Midway, Utah.
And what's your first name?
Michael.
Michael. Welcome to the show.
Michael, yeah.
Well, Michael, hopefully he will call in any second. I'm not sure if his internet went out or what. But what exactly were you going to ask him for a question?
I was curious if he has ever heard of any stories where if the people that have seen aliens, if they've ever heard about this white powdered gold, this monatomic elements that supposedly the aliens know about, and because it's what I think gives them their long life and their super health and their intelligence. Anyway.
Wow. Okay. Never heard of any of this stuff. So he just tried to call in. I tried to accept his call. I'm not sure what is going on here.
I can wait.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Meanwhile, though, we have Marc. You on?
I am here.
Marc, our guest. We lost our guest. He just tried to call in. Michael, do you mind calling back a little bit later on? Is when
fine.
when we get Preston back?
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. I appreciate the call. Thank you. Marc, how you doing?
Hey, Martin. How are you?
Good. So, listen, we're going to have to try. If I'm not sure what's going on with Preston's. Here he is right now. Let's try to get him back on. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Just try. Here we go. I think it's going to work. Hey, you're back.
I am.
Hey, Preston. I'm not really sure what happened. You froze, and then that was the end of you. So you're back. Thank you. Hey, Preston. We had someone call in and ask a question. I didn't quite get what he was saying exactly, but we do have someone on. We have Marc dD'Antonio on, and I told you earlier that I was wanting him to come on to tell his story. So, Marc, welcome to the show, and you're on with Preston Dennett.
Hi, Preston. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm just fine, thank you. It's fine. I'm actually out in the observatory, so you have to mind the sounds of the telescope because I'm doing a little bit of research here. But I told Martin I could call in anyway, and we could talk for a while. Sounds okay to me, but So, Martin, what do you want me to talk to him about, or tell you guys about?
We're talking about USOs, and just a minute ago, he was talking about a case back in 1971 that was very similar, or talking about speed and everything, a submarine case back in 1971. Marc, I'd like for you to tell. I don't think Preston's ever heard your story, and the listeners. We have some people in the chat room that are excited to hear about it. Just one question I want to ask you, though, Marc. Was the particular sub that you were on, was that a nuclear submarine?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
I was not a sailor. I was just a guest because of the work I do for the Navy. That work may come to a grinding halt. I mean, but I've had a number of years with it anyway, right? So I'm okay with it. I just, I just thought that it was a really interesting experience. Because why should it happen to me? Going on a ride, and as I thought about it, I felt, well, maybe what happened to me is something that happens a lot. That's the only way I could actually make this assumption that it happens a lot, and it's a double-edged story. There's two sides to it. Because here's how it worked. Okay, first I was invited to go for a ride because of some of the work I did close to the Navy for a number of years. So. They said, "You want to go for a ride on a nuclear sub?" I said, "Yeah." Well, gee, sure. Of course. And where do I start? And they're like, "Slow down. It's going to be next month." And so I was already heading for the door, kind of a thing. So they set it up. I went down and went on board the sub. I know an awful lot about submarines. That's kind of what my business is with the Navy. I actually own a company that makes these very high-end engineering models of submarines, concepts that are far future. So they're 30 years out typically. So I've made models that just look so outlandish that if someone saw them today, they would say, "Wow, it's a spaceship," or "Wow, it's an alien craft," in our seas. And that's kind of what attracted me to the whole submarine industry. And I've always been interested in unidentified flying objects. So not even thinking anything about that, I went on board the sub and I asked when we were going to get underway. And that was about a couple hours after we got through the orientation and we're told, they got a full tour. We could go anywhere we wanted on the boat, even to the back end, which I thought was pretty interesting. But, at the time, with my clearance and so forth, that wasn't an issue. I just had to have someone with me. So during that time, I asked when we're going to get underway, and they said, "We've been underway for about 2 hours." All right. And we didn't even know because we were actually going through relatively calm estuary type waters. And so, but I realized once we got out into the open ocean, okay, then the boat started rocking and rolling. And we're still on the surface because they travel on the surface for a long time before they go under. They do a survey of all the ships in the area, make sure there's nobody nearby, and then they will dive, okay? Well, during that time, I got really badly seasick. I didn't ever throw up, but, as I tell people, it was the best time I had being seasick. If you could have a good time at it, that was it. That's the way I want to do it again if I have to. So we went to sea, and I was sitting in the sonar area. They call it the sonar shack. It's actually a little row of consoles just to the right side of the control room, and that's seen from looking from back to forward. And I was on the right side and sitting at one of the consoles that apparently wasn't in use, and I was sitting there trying to just zone out in the semi-darkness there because it was around a barrier wall, and I was really feeling like it was going to get better, and I was feeling I was breathing and so forth. And then I don't know how much time passed, but we were already out there for many hours, and when the sub goes under, okay, and this is the difference here. At some point when we submerged, the rocking and rolling from the surface just goes away. It just goes away. It feels like you feel like right now sitting in your rooms, okay? You don't feel anything, but you feel a vibration in your feet because the sub is noisy. It's got vibrations, but the Navy prides itself on those noises and vibrations not getting out of the sub. So as I'm sitting there, and I'm literally almost falling asleep. And I'm thinking, you know what? I can do that for a little while. I'll just take a little nap, get rid of this seasickness for sure, and then be done with it. And then as I'm sitting there just zoning out, all of a sudden, the kid at the sonar console announces, "Con sonar, fast mover, something to that effect." And I jolt awake with an adrenaline rush. And I'm thinking, oh, great, I'm going to get killed by a torpedo out here. It's supposed to be a pleasure cruise. I'm going to die out here. Why did I even say yes to this? I was going through all the reasons why I shouldn't even be there. When the executive officer comes around and says, "What do you have?" And the kid's talking. Now, as I said, it's kind of noisy on the sub. I couldn't hear everything they were saying. And because all the seats are bolted down, I had to kind of slide forward on the seat cushion, okay, and kind of just put the little corner of my butt on that seat. So I was literally trying to hold myself up with my legs while leaning forward enough to kind of overhear the conversation, which is probably not a good idea, as you'll see. And so I said, I sat there and listened, and he asked for the XO asked for the course and bearing, and I couldn't hear that. But then he said, "Well, wait, how fast is that going?" And the kid kind of, and he was a kid. He looked at the screen, and he said, and I thought he said several. I know he said several hundred knots. He said it's going several hundred knots, and he was sort of had this incredulous voice. He's never seen anything like that. He didn't. And the XO said to him, "Okay, can you confirm it?" and didn't act incredulous, didn't go, huh? Or anything like that, didn't ask for anything other than confirmation. And that's when the kid said, yeah, I'll check the other, I can check the other sonar or whatever. I can't remember exactly how he said it. And all of a sudden his face was in mine, because remember, I'm leaning forward now and on a little diagonal off my seat trying to listen in and horn in on their conversation. And then suddenly I got this kid's face in mine. He goes, oh, sorry, let me back up. And I backed up, and he says, oh, I'm sorry, sir. And he looks at the screen I was sitting at, which was actually on, okay, and there was a developing track there too, and it was a very faint line, a very faint track, which I assume is what he was talking about. It was not, there's nothing loud on this sonar. It was all very faint, very faint traces. And he went back, he says, yeah, it's on this one too. He said, whatever he said, that this, it's on this something or other, I don't know if he said TB29 or some other 16, I don't know. But we basically said it was on this one too. And the XO is looking at the kid, and the kid says, what do I do? Sir, how do I handle this? What do I do? Because he had never done this before, apparently, for the kid. And the executive officer just looked at him and said, okay, log it and dog it. Sir, yes, sir. And XO walked away. Kid did whatever he was doing. And I got up, and I followed the executive officer out there, okay? Hey, look, I'm invited. I'm a special guy, man, right? I got all these special privileges. Go on the sub. Yeah, check me out. Big wig. Walked up to the executive officer, and he said, sir, I know something about these fast movers. Can I help you in any way? And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, Mr. D'Antonio, are you having a good ride? Yes, sir, I am. Let's keep it that way. And he turned and walked away. So much for my special status, right? So that was kind of like my first introduction to that need-to-know process, because I thought I was Joe Cool up until that point. And from that point forward, decades ago, I've never let it go to my head, let me tell you. So anyway, that was the incident.
What year was this, Marc?
I can't tell you the year, because that tells too much. And I've actually talked I've talked to a number of people about it, especially down in the Navy, and they'd rather I not say a thing. But this much of it doesn't get me in trouble.
You actually published. I saw something published, and it kind of circulated quite a bit. A story with you telling this, right? Yeah, and it was only the things that I can tell, and the UK Sun actually is the one that published it, and the UK Sun's a bit of a tabloid. Everybody knows that, but they got this one right. I asked the reporter Emma Perry. I asked her, please don't publish this particular information or this particular information, because I told her a little more, and then nothing classified, obviously, and but just information that would allow ne'er-do-wells to take the story and do other things with it that were unintended, maybe. But and she said she wouldn't, and I figured, all right, well, that's it. She's probably going to publish everything I said and more. But she didn't. She, to her credit, she published only what I told her to publish. I was very pleased to see that. And the story that she relayed is exactly what I told her. Now, it didn't end there, because, see, I continued to work for the Navy, and I had to do another job for the Joint Chiefs. Okay, they work for the President of the United States. And one of the particular Joint Chiefs was a friend of mine that over time, I'd become friends with him. And he asked me for a project. I did the project for him, and he said, hey, why don't you drive it down? I live in Maryland here at the house. You come down to the house, hang out for the afternoon with my wife. We'll just talk. And, oh, yeah, sure, that'd be great. So I went down, and when his wife was in the other room, I leaned over to him, and I said, what can you tell me about the Fast Mover program? Because it never left my mind. I asked him, okay, this is the guy, he's like way up there. And I said, what can you tell me about the Fast Mover program? Now, you know how it goes. These guys could say, and probably should have said, and could, and may always have said, well, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that is. I have no idea what that is. And he didn't say that. He leaned over to me and he says, I can't talk about that program, Marc. I'm sorry. Whoa! I I practically did something, crazy at that point. Would have had to drive home with a really funny look on my face. I'll tell you, because I actually couldn't believe he said that. In a sense, he was saying nothing but saying everything, Wow. And I was just astonished by that. And look,
I'm not saying that it's extraterrestrial in nature. I'm just saying there is something going on that we don't understand that the Navy is tracking. I know that. You know, and when Douglas Trumbull and I were creating those UFOTOG units, we're doing one for land. Those are the automated UFO detection systems that are going to use science, to tell whether they're here, okay, rather than I took a picture or I got a video. It's going to use science and a bunch of multivariate instruments that will tell us different data for the same sighting. But we also developed one for going underwater, all right, and that's a USO detector, and it doesn't look up; it looks down. It looks down, and we're trying to see if we can detect something that way. Well, that caught the attention of the DoD. And, we actually had some defense folks call us and say, hey, can we come up and meet with you and want to talk to you about all these projects you're doing? And that hasn't happened yet. That meeting has not happened. It's been put off and put off and put off, sometimes by us, sometimes by them. And I'm okay with that. I don't, it may be innocent, but it may not be. But there it is. That's the story. Again, as a science guy, these are the kinds of things that, I believe, as most science folks do, that the universe is a populated place. And as you know, that's the title of my book, The Populated Universe. So I believe that they're here. This story is not in that book at all. It has nothing to do with that, but it has to do with the possibilities of life elsewhere around exoplanets. It's an exoplanet book. But anyway, I think that there's definitely something to this. I don't know what those were, what it is. The thought of extraterrestrial life. Yes, maybe, but you also have to consider other things we don't know, and what those things are, I can't begin to tell you. So,
hey, Preston, do you have any questions for Marc while he's on?
Well, you're shaking his head a lot, so I think he's just like, what an idiot,
No, it's amazing to hear this stuff. You mentioned log it and dog it. What do you mean by dog it?
Hide it, bury it. Yeah, log it and dog it. And I've set off, and I didn't finish the sentence. He said log it and dog it, and I usually, when I retell it, I say log it and dog it, which I think means bury it. I don't know that it means it, but that's dog it. Dog the hatch, close the hatch, seal it in, kind of a thing. So I think he meant hide it. So
Preston was saying earlier that a number of people in the Navy or that have been on regular subs or regular ships have noticed nothing, and until they're on a nuclear ship, which is pretty strange. I'm wondering if there's any reason for that.
Yeah, I think there is, actually. And Preston may have plenty to say on that, but just my personal feeling, real quick, I'll just say, and then Preston, I don't want to dominate your time, I'm sorry. But my personal feeling is we're on the surface of the water in droves with tons and tons of vehicles. Anyone watching the Earth from space will notice that. Anyone who has a capability to see where else we are, like underwater, would notice that there's an absolute dearth of human presence underwater. We don't have cities underwater. We don't have, underwater habitats that are populated by lots of people. We don't have even research habitats underwater. We only have a few submarines from a few people in this planet. And they probably don't even differentiate who's who, you know what I mean? And so, we have a few submarines, and that's it. So they probably say, hey, let's go hide out there. If we're going to hide, let's hide underwater. I would. You just have to change the sign on your pressure equation. If you can go, interstellar, well, there's no reason in the world why you can't just, keep the water out and press outward rather than, keep the walls together and pull inward. It's just probably a relative change for you, a relative scientific switch for you as an advanced civilization.
Awesome.
But but I don't know, Preston, what do you think?
That makes perfect sense to me. I think that's why they're underwater, is because they can and we can't. Though I did hear back in the 1960s, the Navy was looking into developing a flying submarine.
Yes.
Don't know if they ever got around to it.
Yeah, they did, actually, and I worked on that project. I actually, it was called the MPUAV at the time, and it was classified at first, but it's unclassified now, which is why I can talk about it. And it was a source of a lot of UFO sightings. It was a system that would leave a mother submarine, like an Ohio-class sub, come out of the missile tube, unfold its wings, come to the surface, take off from the water like an aircraft, go fly around, do a recon mission or an ordnance drop, land back on the water, fold up its wings, submerge, go back into the missile tube, and go home.
Oh,
Wow.
And then, it's like the flying sub from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And we joked about it being the flying sub, and we used to call it FS1, the Flying Sub 1. But it turned out that, and we also called it the Birdie, that was a code name. And when we built this thing, and it turned out that that was the flying sub, I believe, of rumor. And it was actually one of those things which is basically sort of one of the first drones, actually. Because it was developed like 10 years ago. Actually, maybe more.
I know they have drones, military drones now that can go in and out of the water, which is pretty interesting.
Well, and I worked on a project where I had to develop drones that would leave a sub. And I called them Whiskers after Sequest DSV. They had these little scanning devices that would go several kilometers away from the sub and act like whiskers, and sense anything that's out farther, sit and wait for a while, listen, and do a gauge of the ocean. And I thought those would be really cool to have. And then I was informed, we have them. And remember that model you made of these little things? Oh, yeah. I go, yeah, those were them. Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't realize they already made those. So we're making way in the technology arena, but underwater is very different. Different frequencies don't travel well underwater, and some do, some don't. So getting the right frequency, is crazy. Like the instrumentation to look down for a USO is not the same instrumentation that looks up for a UFO above ground, above in the water. It's all different instrumentation. Because you don't have the transmissivity of light underwater like you do above. So electromagnetic radiation is right out, but you can use certain high frequencies and low frequencies to actually do some work, and that's the kind of thing where we're going. I believe.
Well, I have you both on here. There's a question that came up in the chat room, and this person is wondering since we have such incredible radar technology, why can't we actually find USOs under the oceans? How hard is that? I mean, this is kind of what you're addressing anyway, right, Marc? You're looking into doing something like that?
And radar, I don't think, the radar's not going to cut it, because what does Doppler radar show you? When you look at the weather radar, what's that show you? What's that Doppler radar show you?
Just
shows you rain.
A what?
Right? It shows you rain. Doppler radar shows you rain. It shows you the rain clouds, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So the radar is not going to work in water.
Well, sonar, I guess sonar is what the person meant.
Sonar. Yeah, well, all right. Well, sonar is also fine, but the issue is not that the sonar may not work. It's just that the sonar will immediately tell everybody else where you are, because everyone will know where you are, including the people you're trying to ping. And if it's some unknown ship, it's going to know, and it's going to do whatever it can to hide. Maybe that's already being done. I don't know. When I was at sea with that sub for that one time, there was no active pinging going on. There was no active ping.
Mm-hmm.
And pings don't sound like they do in the movies. They don't go like in the movies. It's actually it's like a really warbly, high-pitched squeal in real life. Anyway, so it's pretty it's pretty cool, but I don't. The problem is we don't have technology to actually detect things that are underwater very well. Our sonar is not even. It's great sonar, okay, but we have to be moving slow to get the best results, and twist and turn a little bit to kind of move that long array that's you're towing behind the submarine to actually get the best signal, and you got to be moving very slowly. So that doesn't give us a lot of coverage in the oceans.
Yeah.
We need a satellite that can look. That's the thing, and there's no way to do sonar from a satellite, obviously, and radar's not going to do it. So, we got a sticky wicket here, you might say. So there's a lot of concerns that way, in my view.
I think probably the technology could be there if someone would fund a satellite to just look, in the oceans through some type of method to see, what's going on. I'm sure some technology will come along eventually, but who would fund something like that? That would be the thing.
Well, only a black project somewhere in one of the governments, like Chinese, Russian, us, right, Preston? You probably have an opinion of that.
Right. Well, I know the Navy is well aware of this stuff. Interestingly, the Navy's been doing a bunch of sonar research right in this Southern California area, to the point where they were sued by environmental groups.
Oh, for the whale injuries.
Right. And a judge ruled, no, the Navy's allowed to do what they want. The environmental groups kept pushing, and they finally reached an agreement to limit the testing in this area. But it's pretty clear that the Navy is fully aware of what's going on, and that most of these sightings aren't being officially logged into the logbook. At least when I interviewed Ray Sachs, he was never told he couldn't talk about this. But after they had this sighting, the second in command turns to them and says, "Stop talking about this. Don't talk about this." He turns to the captain and says, "Sir, how do I report this in the log?" And the captain turns to him and says, "People who report this sort of thing don't move up in rank." So they didn't report it at all. And when Ray Sachs went down below, of course, he told everybody, because they already knew. It was a big, huge buzz aboard the submarine, and everyone wanted to know.
Yeah, you betcha it would be.
Right. So, yeah, I'm sure they're fully aware of it and are trying to deal with it as best as they can.
So, Marc,
okay. I'm sorry. I was going to tell Preston. I really do believe that there is a fast mover program. Okay, based on my discussion with one of the Joint Chiefs and seeing this thing on the sub. I didn't ask to see this. In fact, I haven't talked about it for decades because I basically really was kind of afraid to. But there came a point where I felt that technology has moved along enough. But more importantly, the Russians have already come out and talked all about the USOs that they're encountering and that their Navy has seen. So that was sort of like a signal which says, okay, you know what? If they're talking about it, then I feel more confident that I can talk about it.
Wow.
And that was it. I was just chicken. I didn't want to mess with that, but if the Russians are talking about it, I can talk about it. That's how I looked at it.
So, Marc, you do a show. You want to go announce when your show is, how people can watch that on Sundays?
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you, Martin. It's Sky Tour Radio, and it's basically we learn about the universe through the scientific lens. And I actually take people on. It's a 1-hour show right now. We're talking about going to 2, and basically the show is called Sky Tour Radio, and I'm actually talking to you from inside the observatory, which is the Sky Tour live stream observatory, which is the YouTube channel. It's the companion observatory to the show. And so, in Sky Tour Radio, we deal with astronomical objects. We talk about exoplanets and alien life possibilities. And I do things, in that show a little bit differently, I think. I mean, as a science guy, we're not supposed to speculate on alien life and so forth. But I don't know. I've seen some things that I can't explain, and I'm willing to say that. I mean, why can't you just say, look, I don't understand. I saw something weird. You want to chastise me for it? Fine. I'm not teaching in a college, okay, or anything like that. So, I have no tenure to worry about. I own my own company. So what are you going to do? You're going to get me fired? I'd have to be the one to fire me. So I'm okay with that. So I feel like I'm in a position where I can talk about and say these things. And I speculate because I think we need to speculate to get the conversation going.
Right. So
and that's radio.
When and where can someone see your show or listen to your show?
It's Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on KGRA Radio, KGRAradio.com.
Great. All right. Hey, Marc, thanks so much. Thanks for calling in and sharing that great story. I love it. Sure.
Great to talk to you, Preston. I've been looking forward to meeting you at some point. And at least here it's a one-way video. I see you, but you can't see me because the observatory is dark. So there's no point in turning on the camera.
All right, Marc. All right, you take care.
Thanks a lot, Martin.
All right, thanks. So
bye-bye.
We still have the lines open, the call-in numbers up on the screen. We had someone call in while we lost you, Preston. I didn't quite get his question. His name was Michael. Michael, if you want to call back in, go right ahead and give us a call. Again, the number's up on the screen. So interesting, the submarine sightings. Are there other ones that you're aware of, Preston?
Yeah, there are a few, which I talked about in the book. I did talk to a submarine navigator who was on a boat, actually, convoying a convoy with 2 boats. He was on the boat he was following another boat. and they went up the coast and had a really remarkable USO sighting, just sort of at the northern end, in the San Simeon area, almost Central California, the northern edge of this whole complex. But their sighting was really interesting because they're going along right up the coast when suddenly it's at night. They see this object in the water right on the coast in an area where it couldn't be because it's very shallow there. There's lots of rocks. It's off limits to ships because it's too dangerous. And yet here's this very, very large, it's not a ship, it's a lighted object of some kind. And they're looking at it, trying to figure out what could this possibly be and what is it doing there, when suddenly their own electronics start to malfunction. They knew exactly where they were. They had a global positioning finder, very experienced sailors, had navigated a submarine thousands of miles, so they knew what they were doing. And suddenly their depth finder is showing that they're in 10 feet of water. Huh. They knew they weren't, wow. So they're very, very disoriented and like, well, oh my God, I think this was caused by the USO to get them out of that area or something, because that's exactly what they did, which they pretty much had to do because, they can't crash. So they turn off to the left towards the deeper water and go just a little bit when suddenly something they can't explain happens. The USO is no longer on the coast. It's right in front of their ship, and it's coming closer. And so they stop, and they're wondering what to do. This thing looks like it's going to collide with them. There's no standard navigation lights, showing which side the ship is going to pass on. It didn't look anything like they'd ever seen. And finally it comes and passes on their port on their left side, and about a half mile away maybe, which at sea is very close. And he said they couldn't really tell anything about what it was because it was too darn bright until it got past them, and they could see it looked like banks of stadium lights. This is a description I've heard a number of times. Wow. And it stopped and kind of just stood there and looked at them, completely freaking them out because they weren't moving at this point either. And they had a little bit of a standoff there for a few minutes until they just became too nervous and decided they're leaving. I'm wondering if they had missing time or something, because suddenly this USO is on the coast and then it's right in front of them. That's sort of a red flag I look for. They denied it. They felt like they did not have missing time, but I think it's still a possibility. They have no history of UFO sightings or, in their childhood or anything like this. So it's an open question, but great witnesses. And when you got these military guys telling you we can't explain it, and they're already familiar with this advanced aircraft and submarines, for that matter, like Marc, well, you've got something on your hands that is unexplained.
Are there any videos or pictures of USOs that you're aware of? There are.
Yeah, surprisingly, there are a number of people who've been able to take photographs of this. As far as videos, that's much rarer. There was a very famous video which played on Brandon Chase's documentary, UFOs Are Real, in which a pilot, a helicopter Navy pilot, Leland Hansen, I believe was his name, photographed or filmed a UFO over Catalina Island. It was never debunked. They never could figure out what it was. They tried to debunk it, saying it was a plane, but there was no planes in that area that were known. And for that matter, when they all first saw it, these Navy guys, it wasn't just the one guy, they all saw it. It was hovering in place. It wasn't moving. And when they finally got the camera out, this thing was kind of moving at a leisurely pace over the island.
Is this the one back in '66?
Yeah, that could be it. I'd have to look up the exact date, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, it's a video, I don't know, I think it's only about 11 seconds long, something like that, back in 1966. And it shows like the mountain. I think we can pull it up on YouTube. 1966, that's when it was, in April. So did that one actually have anything to do with the water, or was that just in Catalina?
That was just your standard UFO, but it's right over this area, so you can't really separate it from the whole USO phenomena, because they're obviously the same thing. But one thing I do want to get into real quick, because I know we're quickly running out of time, is another data point. as to why I think there's a base here, is that there's 4 or 5 encounters in this area involving not 1 or 2 objects, not 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 even. I am talking over 100.
Wow.
A huge number of objects. There was one sighting, a wave of sightings on June 14th, 1992. I've interviewed dozens and dozens of people who saw UFOs on that night, and some who saw USOs, and one couple who lived very high in the area, which overlooks the ocean. They started counting these objects because they were coming up from below, not from above, from below, behind a ridge, down by the ocean. They counted first 10 and then 20 little groups of objects coming up. This went on for 2 hours. They counted about 200 objects. So where are all these objects coming from? And they're coming from below. There's another case just like that on Catalina Island, another case involving 20 or 30 objects 2 years later, which were actually photographed by the witness. So this is another thing that's really got me scratching my head. If there's not a base down there, there is a parking lot involving hundreds of these objects.
Now, were these objects all looking the same, or were they different?
The same in that case.
Mm-hmm.
They were all these kind of half disc, kind of, not quite a disc, but sort of a half disc shape. But in another case, which took place on the north end of Catalina Island, they were all different shapes. They were saucer-shaped, they were manta ray-shaped, spherical. They had colored lights on them, purple, green, yellow, orange, really beautiful. They tried to take photographs of them, but the multiple cameras failed. That's taken place in a number of cases in this area, and for that matter, across the world. They can exert a force field or something, I think.
There is something strange. A lot of people do talk about electronics and cameras, all over the place. I've heard many, many, many stories where a fully charged battery all of a sudden is dead or just not operating, which really is bizarre.
Coincidence. Yeah.
I have a question for you. How do you? And by the way, we have about less than 20 minutes. If anyone wants to call in, that number's up on the screen. How do you get all these people to interview? It sounds like you interview a lot of people, and do they actually contact you, or how does that happen?
Well, it started out slowly. I wasn't really looking to investigate USOs in particular, but I was collecting accounts. I wrote a chapter in my book, UFOs Over California, specifically about these accounts. And to publicize the book, I wrote an article for Fate magazine. I was receiving more reports. And this is when I really sort of came into this UFO undersea base. And I wrote it up from Fate magazine and said, is there an undersea UFO base off the Southern California coast? It was a very popular article. It went viral, got me interviewed by newspapers, and I started speaking at conventions. This brought in a lot of reports. And I was actually contacted by the History Channel for deep sea UFOs. And it was very popular. They had record ratings with that episode. So they called me back twice, actually. I did another episode with UFO hunters. And so by that time, I had become the guy. And I was receiving a lot of reports. And it's just never stopped since then. A lot of people have been contacting me.
Just a real quick, Jag, you mentioned earlier about everyone at work looked to you about this when I think you said your boss was going to Catalina UFO tours or something. But so how does that work for you in the workplace? Do you have any grief at all, or is it well accepted?
It's surprisingly well accepted and has always been. I've been very lucky. I've had a number of bosses throughout the years, and gosh, a revolving door of coworkers. And everyone's been great. Some people don't believe, and I can clear a room certainly if I try and bring this up. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these people will come to me privately and say, "Oh my gosh, I saw something," and I've become something of a local clearinghouse. And whenever there's a new employee, they bring me in like, "Here's Preston. Have you ever seen a UFO? Talk to him." So people are fine with it. I think we've reached a point now. Certainly back when I started researching in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't as well accepted as it is now. But now people are like, "Yeah, sure." They'll know about it.
We have a call coming in. I'm going to take it. So hang on just a minute. Caller, you are on the line. What's your first name and where are you calling from?
Hi, Martin. This is Andy from Stratford, Connecticut. How you doing?
Hi, Andy. Welcome to the show. You have a question for our guest?
Yeah, just a quick question for Preston. I'm fascinated with the idea of a hard hat divers or saturation divers possibly having some strange stories to tell themselves. Does he know of any from oil rig or pipeline work? In his experience, and then just I had one that I had heard through another show. Beyond Creepy covered a story where the son of a hard hat diver from Norway observed some kind of bizarre tracks on the seafloor in a fjord. He was with another diver, and they followed it as far as they possibly could, and gave up. And the guy was traumatized by what he saw, and was told never to discuss it again by his superiors. But I'll take your answer off the air. I didn't know if you had any stories yourself. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. We also have another. Just to let you know, we have another caller waiting. So go ahead.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Andy. That's a great question. I don't really have cases like that in particular. I've talked to a few people who have been scuba diving and have seen stuff. We mentioned one. There was another lady who was scuba diving and had a UFO sighting and was actually abducted while scuba diving.
Oh, jeez.
So off the coast of Catalina Island. So yeah, it does happen. I think this is probably a lot more common, but getting these people to talk is another story, particularly if they're in the military. So yeah, I'm guessing there's a lot of reports we're not hearing about.
Right. So, caller, thanks for holding. What's your first name and where are you calling from?
This is Ryan from South Carolina.
Oh, Ryan, I haven't heard from you in a long time. How you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. I haven't. It's been about a month or two. I haven't called.
Yeah. You got a question for Preston?
Yeah, I did. He had mentioned earlier that he considered there was large numbers of USOs in the ocean, and they're all over the place. I just wondered if he had a theory as to their purpose. Y'all may have covered this earlier, but I was distracted at one point. But I was just wondering if he had a theory as to what they were doing. Was it simple exploration or something else?
Good question.
Right. Yeah, that is a great question. And it's the million-dollar question, really, because we can only speculate as to what the alien agenda is. There's been some speculation that they value water and can use it as a fuel, perhaps. I don't think there's a whole lot of evidence to speak to that, but there are many cases where people have seen UFOs sucking up water out of lakes and things like this.
Right, yeah.
So, that's a possibility. As far as exploring our planet, well, yeah, we know they're doing that. They're abducting people. They're picking plants of all kinds. They're taking pretty much all samples of animals. And most of our life is underwater. So if they're going to do a full survey of our planet, it's going to entail a lot of ocean research. And so, yeah, I'm guessing that's part of it. The alien agenda is a big subject to tackle. I think there's a lot of reasons they're here. I think we are probably one of their main draws. They're very interested in all things human. And I think that's probably the main reason why they're here.
Ryan, anything else?
Nothing I can think of.
All right. Hey, thanks for the call, Ryan.
All right, thank you.
So there. Let's just say that there is a base and they're underwater. Why would, when a sighting that you talked about earlier, why would 200 of them come out? I mean, that's almost like a invasion of some kind, or it seems like it would be.
Right.
I feel like if I saw that, I'd think we were being invaded. I wonder what something like that would have been about. And in that particular case, did you say there was a lot of witnesses that actually saw that?
Yes, some witnesses saw one or two craft. Some were chased down the road. Some saw 5 or 10. Some saw 10 or 20. One guy down by the beach actually saw some of this stuff He didn't see it come out of the water. He heard it. Heard this very loud splash of water. Other people were screaming. This is down in the Venice area. He turns and looks at the water, and this huge, giant object has just come out of the water. Waterfalls are coming down around it. He says it must have been stadium-sized. It was huge. He couldn't tell exactly how big, but he knew it was big because there was little objects next to it, which looked like they were about 20 feet across, and they looked like little bugs next to it. And he says, honestly, I only saw this thing for maybe 3 seconds. It just darted north very fast. So he only got a brief glimpse of it, really. But yeah, definitely large numbers of objects, and I think that's one of the main reasons, one of my main data points. But I talked to whistleblowers as well, people who are government insiders, and a number of people told me there's a tunnel in this area that leads from actually Area 51 to Edwards Air Force Base, Area 51 in Nevada to Edwards Air Force Base in the high desert, all the way to the Catalina Channel area. Not just one person telling me this, a number of people. And mind you, this is well...
Do you think that's believable? I mean,
no, I don't know.
That sounds like a monumental... to go that many miles? How many miles is that in total?
It's a lot, thousands. So after the third or fourth person starts telling me this, I'm beginning to wonder. Certainly I looked into this sort of thing, and there's evidence to support this. Richard Sauder wrote a book called Underground Undersea Bases.
Yeah, I had him on the show.
Yeah, he talks quite a bit about this sort of thing. I think the technology is probably there to do it, and it's according to these guys that they told me that it's a huge tunnel. It's underwater, and it's big enough for multiple submarines to go in and out. And what I found really interesting, it was 2006 when I started really looking into this. Years later, this so-called Malibu anomaly appears all over the internet, right in the center of this area, which appears to show a tunnel. It really does in some Google images, not all. But you can't really pick the ones that don't show the tunnels any more than the ones that do. So I'm kind of on the fence about this so-called anomaly. But I do find it intriguing that it's right in the middle where all this activity is, where these people said a tunnel was.
Right. I think that was. I think there was a lot of controversy about that, and supposedly debunked. But I mean, has anyone actually? I mean, how far under the water is that anomaly?
It's 6 miles out, and many hundreds of feet down. There was a show with Rob Lowe called Location, where they explore various paranormal phenomena, and went to this place and sent down a unmanned sub, submersible, to check it out.
Yeah.
And didn't find any evidence of artificial construction, but it was a pretty shoestring project. Not a whole lot of time was put into it, and I think it's still an open question. It's supposedly, if you talk to skeptics, they're going to say no. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's kind of why I'm on the fence about it. I don't think there's quite enough proof to say that's it. Robert Stanley says, they don't even need a base. They can just go through wormholes and things like this. So it's a possibility that that's what they're doing. It's a possibility that they're using this so-called natural formation as a base. Just because it's natural doesn't preclude it from being used. Or for that matter, it might not even be that. It could be somewhere else. Because these things can not only go through water, they can go through solid earth. There's a number of cases where people have seen these things go down into the ground. The ground seems to open up, swallow them. So
yeah, I've heard of a couple of situations like that. It sounds so bizarre, doesn't it? Now, what about? I know you're focusing off the coast there, but you mentioned earlier lakes, and also when you were talking about them drawing water up, there's a real famous case where all these people saw that that had like these condos along the lakes. They all saw out the window where the stream of water was going up to this craft. But I know that California has reservoirs more than lakes. Are there talks about any USOs in the lakes in California?
Oh yeah. Well, not a whole lot really. One I did find was Lake Casitas, which is real close to this area. It's an artificial lake, but did involve a really remarkable sighting where the guy saw this object come out of the water. There was a window in it, a very large plastic kind of heavy-looking window. You could see a humanoid figure behind it. He had a camera with him, and he was able to actually photograph this thing as it moved off. Not a great photo, but it shows something. There's a number of cases of UFOs in rivers. I mean, I mentioned one in Arkansas, in Lake Hamilton, out of Hot Springs, Arkansas. 4 teenagers were on their little speedboat there. They had parked. They were just going to park there and mess around a little bit. 2 boys, 2 girls, if you know what I mean. Just having, a good time. And suddenly this USO, because I don't know what else to call it, comes up and right next to their boat. It's twice the size of their boat. It's black. It's completely round. The girls are freaking out. They're like, let's get out of here. They can hear it gurgling or something. So they gun the boat. The boat will not move. It's stuck. So they're all freaking out at this point when suddenly they have missing time. They're somewhere else in the lake. It's 2 hours later, and they're moving at full speed. The USO is gone. They rush home, and their parents are furious, don't want to hear anything about any USO, and are going to call the police unless those boys go home right now. So, yeah, there's a number of cases like this where they're in, in upstate New York. There's a number of cases in which these objects were seen in tiny little reservoirs, not deep at all.
Yeah.
So they're hiding. Yeah.
Wow, bizarre. I almost forgot to ask this. Bobby sent this in, and he's usually a listener to the show. How about the Leo Carrillo State Park on Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu? There was some type of sighting there. Did you ever hear about that? Happened at the beach?
Number of sightings in that area. It's right there in the center of the activity. Gosh, my favorite involves a really interesting sighting in which a group of partygoers, about 40 or 50 of them, had decided to throw a little nighttime beach party. And late into the night, as the party's beginning to wind down, 10 or 11 o'clock or so, a group of them go down to the water because there's this USO out there. And they're trying to figure out what the heck is it. It's got colored lights all over it. It's huge. It looks like a cruise ship. It's obviously not because the lights are all random in different shapes. And they're thinking, oil platform, what could this be? No, it's too close to them to be anything. And suddenly they turn around because behind them, the top of the cliff, is this bright bank of stadium lights switches on. It's impossible. There's no way this car lights could do this. And so everyone in the party looks up at these bank of lights, which flick off, and suddenly coming down the stairs is a group of humanoids. Weird. And at this point, wow. it got very strange. A lot of the partygoers kind of switched off, didn't react to the humanoids, didn't apparently notice them, didn't remember them afterwards. But the guy I interviewed remembered him. He's had encounters his whole life. And he said that there was 10 of them at least, men and women, all dressed in blue jumpsuits, all about 5.5 feet tall, all looked very similar, like twins almost, dark complected, like South American maybe, or Mesoamerican, short hair, good looking, and were walking among the group in a very strange way, as if surveying them or something. Had weird stuff in their hands with lights on it, and started signaling to this USO out in the water. They ended up all having missing time. When he woke up, he was down by the beach in a row with 10 other people. There was another row of 10 people behind him. No footprints around them, just this weird kind of imprint in the sand around them. And he had some partial memories of being taken on board.
Wow. Boy, that's a wild one. And what do you have coming up next? We are out of time. So do you have writing any other books in the middle of writing something new? Or have plans?
Yeah. Always keeping busy, definitely. I've got a new book coming out hopefully later this year. It'll be volume 3 of my series, Not From Here, about the weirder and more unusual aspects of UFO encounters. And I'm also working on a book about UFO healings. That was the subject of my first book.
Yep.
I had 100 cases, a lot.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about that, yeah.
Got probably, 250 cases now.
Wow, excellent.
So-
Well, we're out of time, Preston. Anyone can reach you on your, do you have a website? I can't remember.
Yeah, I do. If you just Google my name, it should take you there, PrestonDennett.weebly.com.
Excellent. Thanks so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Preston.
Hey, thanks, Martin. I appreciate it.
All right. You take care.
Bye.
All right. Bye. All right, everyone. So thanks so much. Next week, we have an interesting guest coming up, and that is we have, his name is, let me get it here, Lauren Christensen. He's a former police officer, and he is going to be talking about cops and UFOs. So that's next week. Should be an interesting show. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. I want to thank the people that helps out with the show, Alejandro Rojas, our guest, Preston Dennett, Evan for working behind the scenes on YouTube, and Peggy for managing our Facebook page. And again, I want to thank you all for listening. And if you're on the Dark Matter Digital Network, you'll be listening to Dave Schrader coming up on Midnight in the Desert right after this. All right, everyone. So remember to keep your eyes to the sky.